When women find their power, when people discover strength in the feminine, outside influences try to divide and conquer by preying on insecurities and fears. Witches embrace power, and that idea is terrifying, so it's easiest to villainize them. Anyone can be a witch. Anyone can embrace the feminine. But it's so easy to fool people into believing feminine energy is inherently bad or weak. What if we just believe in ourselves and each other? What if we cast our own spells? Welcome to Cinematire. This is your future. How will you dress it? Why did I want to discuss Agatha all along and Wicked together instead of in two separate videos? I mean, genuinely, it's not all about witchcraft and magic. It's about what's good versus what's perceived as good. The assumptions people make based on outward appearances, building community through the need for support, and power found in love. It's about submission versus feminine rage, and real versus faux empowerment. Trusting artists to create stories and not something that's just to consume. It's about joining hands and casting a protection spell, rather than just using power to drive each other apart. Why am I getting so heavy and dramatic about a silly spin-off TV series about comic book characters and a movie based on a musical, based on a book, based on children's books? Because art is art, and community is community. Not everything that can't be explained is evil or wicked. And just because you can understand something doesn't make it black and white, or I guess like purple and black or pink and green. I've said in previous videos and interviews that I was one of less than 10 black kids raised in an all-white town. I was an outsider by default. I fell into witchcraft as a teen, which was very 90s of me. Like a lot of teens, I didn't like when mainstream media found the thing that I thought was just for me. I resented the movie The Craft when it came out because people would say, "You look a lot like that black girl from The Craft," and ask if I was going to cast spells on the audience and choir. And the thing is this, that all sounds very silly as an adult, and by itself, not a very big deal, but I was bullied for much worse than that from my earliest memory, for my race. Finding witchcraft was something that made me feel like I had some semblance of control. Growing up, especially my mother, said that religion and spirituality were personal things that only we could decide, and whatever we ended up believing, just do the research and be true to ourselves. Dressing in an alternative way gave me some control, and I always said that I would rather people bully me for something I could help, the way I dressed, than something I couldn't, which was the color of my skin. And as far back as I could remember, I liked spooky, weird things like Return to Oz.
Oz? Well, I think I'll have myself a look around and see if I can find myself some breakfast.
So it made sense that this is where my style and interests would go. As I got older and the tides would shift to witchy media, it would make me happy because it would sort of shake loose these people who felt the same way I did, and I'd inevitably end up making new friends.
That would please me very much. And you may call me Tick-Tock.
People would lose interest, like with any trend, and the people who were into it all along were kind of out in the open. And as I've gotten older, the people who lost interest were fewer and fewer, and the amount of friends I've made grew larger and larger, which is great for an extrovert like myself. Regardless of how you build it, community and support is important. Now with that all out of the way, let's get into it. Agatha all along follows complicated witch Agatha Harkness as she's awakened from a spell by the goth witch-in-training Teen. He asks her for help accessing the Witch's Road. Agatha, Teen, and a questionable coven set down the road. Agatha learns against her will to accept help and support in a community. She resists it in many ways, so many ways, that it keeps the audience guessing as to her motives and whether or not she's good or bad. I mean, flat out, she is bad. Just because she's a mother with a big heart and loves her child doesn't mean she gets to get away with centuries of murder. You can't cope by doing centuries of killing. That doesn't mean you can't identify with the good parts of her, and I think that's what's so important about this story. I've been thinking about a book I read a million years ago called The Witch Must Die by Sheldon Cashton. It talks about how fairy tales dealt with women doing bad or complicated things, and the men who would adapt these into the more modern stories that we're familiar with didn't like the idea of mothers doing these things, so they morphed them into two-dimensional evil stepmothers and witches, sometimes both at the same time. Like with WandaVision, Agatha is most definitely not that cut and dry.
I promise I won't bite.
I actually did bite a kid once.
And with fairy tales and movies, we've been taught that witches are inherently bad unless they wear bright colors, are conventionally attractive, and have ultra-feminine personalities. We see fictional women who are brash, masculine, and loud, or men who are meek, gentle, and soft, and everyone across the gender and behavior spectrum, and we're taught that we're not supposed to identify with them, or we're just as bad. The way society views women of certain personalities and tries to manipulate the audience into viewing them in a specific way results in a lot of messed up social conditioning. Like, makes me think of Skylar from Breaking Bad, who was honestly very reasonable the whole time. But the audience hated her because she was viewed as shrill. And being shrill is worse than being a literal criminal who takes lives. So Agatha all along has a character whose entire backstory is a mystery until the end. So you get to know her through her personality. The finale happens, and then another finale happens. We have our big fight between ex-girlfriends, and then we go back to see where it all started. So until that moment, all we have to go off of is visual cues and relationships. It's stories like this where costuming is so important to get to the bottom of how somebody is and who somebody is. I find it incredibly interesting that Agatha was dressed like the Wicked Witch of the West in Lilia's trial. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I don't know why you're here. Please go watch it. It's wonderful. But surprise, I'm going to start out by talking about Jennifer Kale. When I talked with Daniel Sellin, the costume designer for Agatha all along, I was so intrigued by the idea of Jennifer Kale, the potions witch, being outwardly socially acceptable type of witch. A corporate witch, if you will. A goop type. She wore pale colors and was hyper feminine compared to all the others. Inspired by the likes of Gwyneth Paltrow. Alice was punk rock and dour. Teen while being incredibly upbeat and personable is a boy and dresses in a goth way. Lilia is an older woman, quirky and wearing a lot of layers. The type of woman people would make a lot of assumptions about if she lived on their street. And Agatha herself has rich lesbian wine aunt energy. She wears very tailored clothes that are easy to restyle in the many ways that give her different airs depending on the situation. There are an absolute ton of great interviews about Agatha's look, her coat, and all the symbolism in the lining, which I'll put in the description. But I want to spend more time talking about the other characters. Jennifer is talking in customer service speak when she's first introduced. You know, code switching. She has a big smile on her face. Her eyes are bright. She's tall and bald with dark skin. The kind of thing that, societally, is not conventionally the default to femininity. Seeing her in every outfit seemed like she was putting on the acceptable black woman costume. Ultra feminine, soft pink, and beautiful soft textiles. Even her pajamas were kind of young for her, softening her and making her approachable. And the outfit she wears in Alice's challenge is very over-the-top virginal compared to the others. In the first trial, she's in an all-white Hampton's wife-type sweater dress with a straight, sleek bob. Something about Jennifer's entire way of dressing really spoke to me, since a lot of what I designed in the beginning of my career was incredibly modest. I'd been taught by society that my body was inherently sexual because of my blackness and early curves. I went out of my way to wear and create things that were pretty modest and very youthful so that I wouldn't offend anybody with the body I was born into. So when I see things like this, I get it. It was really interesting to see that the first time Jen was not put in a costume that was her, like what was viewed as real world armor, was when she was dressed as the crone, the Snow White witch. She seemed self-conscious about it, but moved on from it pretty quickly for her new friends and really opened up. She's bound for what makes her special, and the symbolism isn't lost on me that she's the one black witch. She unbinds herself, and the last time we see her, her necklace, the symbolism of her magical cage, is broken. Lilia Calderou, divination witch, is a woman out of time. So much of what she represents is a lot like women like her. She's older, she lives alone, she's misunderstood and incredibly intelligent. She wears a lot of layers and patterns and has offbeat energy. But if you give her a chance, she has so many interesting things to say. Her costume speaks volumes without being obvious. Every interview I've read or seen reveals something new and interesting about the details that went into her main look. There are embroidered tarot cards that speak to her journey through her long life. She, like everyone else in the coven, also has an important piece of jewelry that speaks to her, of her power, of her history. The pattern clashing really struck me as the clothing worn by somebody disjointed. Obviously, the special mantle of her own awakening was Glinda the Good, because at the end of the day, she was good. She resisted everything that would have made her be seen as a stereotypical witch, unless she was doing it to make money. This was done in a different way than Jennifer Kale, but Jennifer wasn't embarrassed of her relationship with the craft. Lilia seemed like she was, and the time that she finally let go, she was dressed as literally a fictional version of a good witch. Alice Wu Gulliver, Protection Witch, was a pretty stereotypical loner to me. She dressed the way you would expect her to dress being in self-preservation mode in any of the challenges. She didn't really have a particular style outside of her real-world style, which was very punk rock. The burning house on the back of her leather jacket was like a big middle finger to her family curse. In talking with Daniel, he shared a very cute story about shopping and meeting what he viewed as the real teen. Seeing his real-world clothes turn into his Wiccan costume really showed the style he had made for himself was just intrinsically part of him. He was in tune with magic and the feminine power of his original mother. He was never worried or embarrassed of any physical aspect of his appearance. All of his problems had to do with his memories and his heart. Rio Vidal
Hello. Hey.
ran the gamut of large and charged agent, soft and sweet green witch, and dark and imposing incarnation of death. I think one of the things I love the most about all of her costumes was that they were for the female gaze. They were sexy in a way that women find sexy on each other, whether it's platonic or romantic. Not one time did it feel like it was to titillate a male audience. And if anybody did find her attractive in that way, it felt like it was meant to be a side effect. She was unapologetically herself, and it shows in every aspect of what she wears. She contains multitudes. Whether it was purposeful or not, the thing I couldn't stop thinking about was the fact that her stomacher looked like Agatha's final resting place, like a bloom of flowers. And the sweet flush of pink on her cheeks was so lovely, and it looked like it was just for Agatha. Honorable mention to Sharon, rest in peace, for looking similar to the first witch that approaches Agatha before she goes on her centuries-long murder spree. This show really dug deep into my brain and made me reflect on a lot of things I'd been doing and dealing with over the last year. So to have Agatha all along kind of become this all-encompassing thing in my life for several weeks after a pretty reflective witchy year, imagine my surprise when Wicked came into my life.
Oh, she's based on me, you know.
Now let's go down, down, down the yellow brick road. I definitely want to start this section by saying I wanted to discuss the divine feminine, and I ended up falling down a rabbit hole of ego death and spiritual bypassing, so I had to remind myself that this is a costume review channel, and I need to not be so ridiculous. The last few months have been a lot, and have definitely gotten my brain all a Twitter with media. And yes, I know producer Drake will likely put something sassy here. If you haven't had a chance to watch my video on how absolutely and thoroughly wrong I was about Wicked, please check it out. Have you ever had those times where you just really needed to cry and you couldn't? This movie finally shook that loose, and not only did I feel incredibly connected and seen, I felt sadness and happiness at the same time in a colossal hurricane of finally making my brain make sense of what's been going on. Musicals are such an interesting medium because they take what's generally a pretty simplified story, jam it full of expositional songs, and leave you feeling untethered in a way everything feels unreal and real at the same time. People in real life don't generally burst into song to tell you the plot of what's going on. I mean, I do. I sing everything all the time forever. It's escapism at its finest, even when it deals with something serious like Rent or Les Mis. So, a movie based on something so fantastical, making me feel real feelings about some pretty deep stuff. It was a gift. This movie was a gift. A handful of people seemed to misunderstand me when I said the marketing of this movie was bad, but I think I kind of want to rephrase that by saying the marketing itself is not inherently bad, but taking your product and slapping it on everything sort of cheapens it. It makes me think of when Star Wars was just slapping Grogu on everything, from oranges to cleaning products, and it just made me feel like they wanted it to be a product more than they wanted it to be a story. And so if I were to compare Wicked to something like Barbie was an unexpected hit for me because I assumed it was going to be a fun, silly movie based on a toy, and it ended up being deeper than that. I mean, we all saw it.
Don't question it, just roll with it, tiny baby.
And the studio learned the wrong lesson, as was evident by all the think pieces written about how they wanted to make more movies based on toys, not just better movies.
No, this is no longer Barbie's dream house. This shall henceforth be known as Ken's Mojo Dojo Casa House.
But that marketing made sense because it was a movie based on a product. They were trying to sell products. Taking a product like a toy and making more toys and clothes based on that toy makes sense to me. Taking a musical based on a book, based on another book, and slapping it on color change mac and cheese just kind of makes it feel cheap. Watching Paul Tazwell shout out his entire team all week, every week, in the lead up and the outcome of this movie shows how important it is to trust and coordinate with your team. He clearly respects everybody who laid hands on the costumes in this movie, and it shows. Not just in the posts he's making, but in the finished product itself. The costumes are also cohesive, and they really did build a world that's reminiscent of most iterations of Oz. It had this Art Nouveau meets Art Deco feeling that all the best adaptations seem to incorporate. The people in the Emerald City all had what looked very fashionable, and like they were all from the same city. It was full of bright patterns that would definitely show well on stage if this had been a play, but were done in such a way that if someone were wearing it on the street, it would look like a normal high fashion designer garment. It had this otherworldly feeling of being just different enough or out of time enough to where you couldn't quite place it, which made it seem even more fantastical. It reminded me of Anna Karenina in that way of it was a play sometimes and it was real life sometimes. The school uniforms had a very specific and definitive vision. They all looked like they were designed specifically to be uniforms and not to be a costume, if that makes sense. The care that went into designing Elphaba and everything that went into elevating and highlighting her black features made me love her even more. As I said in my other video, I'm a huge fan of the book, and I know that they changed a lot in the musical, but I feel like the essence of her was still there. But I also saw in her what I saw in myself growing up. That thing where you like yourself, but you feel guilty for liking yourself because people see something wrong with you, and you start to doubt whether or not your own vision or your brain are right, because if they don't like you and you like yourself, are you wrong about everything? She had a lot of bluster in the way that she carried herself with her shoulders back, and every garment she wore was so beautifully tailored to exaggerate that. It's so easy to utilize fantasy racism because so often audiences see white as the default. And so if they see a white person that's different, half elf or blue or something, then racism makes sense. And they're like, that's wrong and bad. But if you take the character that is fully just a fantasy character, like, I don't know, a mermaid, and make her black, suddenly racism is okay and they just don't learn the lesson.
He thinks all humans are barbarians.
Oh, they're not so bad.
Glinda is prim and proper, clearly spoiled and wearing all the coolest things. She gets away with all of it because of who she is and where she's from. We see this all the time, but it's turned up to 11 here. And I feel like this is one of the things that is making people upset about how complicated she is as a character. Because when you see her, she seems like a two-dimensional popular girl who's mean at first and learns a lesson. She's not bad after all. And people who are getting the most offended are seeing her bad qualities in themselves. They're not seeing themselves as multifaceted. Either you're good or you're not. Either you're wicked or you're not. They see this pink-clad, white blonde, conventionally pretty and thin girl doing things people don't like very much, and they get upset. How dare they show somebody who's nice to look at doing naughty things? Sort of like Agatha all along, you can watch this and identify with any number of characters, and on the surface it seems like if you choose one, you're bad or good until you get to the end and it sort of tricks you into realizing that, again, it's not just black and white. Is every popular girl with a vast wardrobe good, bad, self-centered, shallow? No. Does liking nice, pretty things or buying a bunch of stuff make you bad and selfish? No. What you do with those things makes you those things, and if the first thing you see when looking at that character's badness, that's maybe time for self-reflection. If looking at Elphaba, the first thing you notice is that she's being played by a black actor, and that makes you upset.
What? What are you staring at?
Again, maybe it's time for some self-reflection, because at the end of the day, it's a pretty simple story. A girl looks different from everyone else, she's treated differently, and people make assumptions about her. And then she's a scapegoat. Her friend doesn't start out as her friend. She starts out as a bully, and makes a lot of assumptions. The real villains in the story are obviously the villains, and there isn't any nuance to who they are. So why am I talking about all this stuff when it's just supposed to be a simple costume review episode?
So you think I should just keep my mouth shut? Is that what you're saying?
What? No, I'm saying...
You think I want to be this way? You think I want to care this much?
Because I've been thinking a lot about types of media that become popular in times of stress. I remember reading somewhere a long time ago that zombie media has a tendency to get popular during times of economic crisis, and that made me think about when media geared towards complex female empowerment fantasies come to the forefront. We've had a lot of witch and vampire stories over the last 2 years. Witches tend to center women and femininity. Vampires tend to center alternate sexualities and body horror.
I like to do it. I enjoy it.
And a lot of that stuff seems to coincide with our current political climate. I personally, as well as a lot of the friends I've talked to about the subject, are embracing this as a way to feel safe and happy and strong. We've seen a certain creator of a certain wizard series show who she really is, and a lot of us have jumped ship and are looking to recreate magic and community that we've had in the past. A lot of stories centering magic and modern fantasy ended at the beginning of the pandemic. Other shows were created and then instantly canceled. Really, in the end, it's about finding our own covens, finding our power and enjoying the stories that make us feel seen, respecting the artists that create these things for us, showing them love and gratitude. The feminine inside all of us is okay. There's good inside of all of us. We are not our worst mistakes, but if you don't work forward from them, you might end up identifying with the wizard while thinking people are saying that you're Glinda. Now to ask you, what was your favorite hidden symbol in any costume from Agatha all along? What do you think is the strongest foreshadowing through costume in Wicked? What do you like to wear that gives you power on tough days? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for checking out this video. If you enjoyed it, please comment, subscribe, like. Maybe, if you think about it, subscribe to my Patreon. Thank you to all of my patrons for being amazing. I appreciate you, and I couldn't do this without you. The last couple of years have been real tough, and you really helped me through it. Until next time, be fancy, be adventurous. I wonder what Rachel's up to.
The question I had for you was, why do you think right now in the current climate, just with everything that's been going on, why are people so drawn to like witchy and metaphysical media? Like, I mean, I feel like this happened like 10 years ago and it's happening again. What do you think it is that's drawing people to this?
Well, I guess, especially for women in today's world, something like, you know, witchcraft or things that are outside the religious right norm, you know, feel really empowering. Because I feel like we're in a time period when women, even white women, are being disenfranchised, and you know, any little bit of movement that we've made has been taken back. When you look at something like The Craft, right? We were teenagers, and when you're a teenager, your hormones are moving and you're becoming woman. It's a very confusing time period. And so the witchcraft in that movie was almost like a direct analogy for that power we feel as teenagers, boy or girl, when we realize like just a look like this can have the power of, that was not a sexy look, but you know what I'm saying. The power of that is really heady. And so I think that made a perfect analogy. And especially, like, not to toot the movie's horn, but I do think The Craft captured the angst of the 90s, my version of The Craft.
Oh, 100%.
You know, and so that was very powerful. And to take that angst and channel it into a spell, which is, you know, to me, no different than a prayer, right? It's all the same.